Well, good morning. Welcome to the start of this year's programs for Art Guild. Marsha Klein and I put together what we think are some varied and engaging programs that are a spin-off of a booklet from the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art using the theme Art is ... But then after that, art is mastery, art is practice. But because there is no absolute explanations for what art is, we hope that you will be encouraged to attend monthly programs that help us think differently about what art is and how it can be expressed. This morning, in follow-up to the exhibition Dakota Modern, the Art of Oscar Howe, we asked my friend Lanniko Lee, a tribally enrolled Miniconjou citizen of the Cheyenne River Reservation, to tell us her knowledge as a Lakota and Dakota tribal member. Lanniko took part in an Upward Bound program as a high school student that featured Oscar Howe as one of its mentors and instructors. Lanniko went on to earn a bachelor's degree from Arcadia University in Pennsylvania and a master's from Middlebury College's Loaf School of English in Vermont. She taught art, literature, and composition to high school and college students. She's engaged in a number of entrepreneurial ventures from her home near Lake Oahe in north central South Dakota. She is on the advisory board of the South Dakota Art Museum. I've known Lanniko for nearly 30 years and always come away from each time I spend with her enriched, knowing a whole lot more about the natural and artistic world from her tribal perspectives that I ever could have or would have imagined without knowing her. And I hope when I was growing up and a child, my parents were older, and so I never got to have a sleepover. So I am particularly grateful to have Lanniko come yesterday, and we could have a sleepover. So thank you for allowing that. I know that you will be as enlightened in her presentation this morning. So please help me welcome Lanniko Lee to talk about art is becoming a good ancestor.
Good morning, friends.
Pick the microphone
Closer to my mouth. Okay. I have to tell a little joke here. As a result of seeing everybody in the audience here, I want you to know I may be going back to school so that I can learn how to read lips. This is what happens when the gray hair comes, so goes the hearing, eh? But anyway, good morning to you all. It's good to see so many showing up for this program. When I was asked to present at the Dakota Modern Oscar Howe Artists, I wondered, what could I possibly add? What hasn't been covered? After all, his artistic skill is at last finally reaching a large audience, receiving acknowledgement in his native homeland, and deservedly so after so many years. He's now being celebrated as an internationally renowned Oceti Sakowin. Knowing all of this and thinking about it, my spirit sang with the invitation. But as I thought about it, you have to give pause. I wonder, what could I possibly add? There's just so much mystery behind his work. Then it came to me. I knew this man. I can share what I learned from him and what I remember about this wonderful relative, this good ancestor. The recent exhibition of Oscar Howe's work was spectacular, as most of you have probably discovered for yourself, and it did inform us, the viewer, much about his personal and professional challenges. Each piece and project are parts of the visual chapters that make up his life, where he was in the development of his craft, and where he was in his life as an artist. As an artist finding his niche in an already burgeoning world of artists vying for recognition, trying to make a living. As a result, he left behind a physical legacy of exquisite paintings, and all of them for us to enjoy. He left for us a visual story from which we can learn about the man and his Dakota culture. Today, I'd like to share what I have come to understand as Oscar Howe's living legacy. By that, I mean the influence in the lives of persons that he touched as an exemplary role model and as an inspiring teacher and mentor. Recently at the museum, his family, his tribal relatives, his colleagues, and his former students expounded on the ways that he influenced them in their lives. As an educator, he offered and demonstrated his skill and his insight. He did this as a forward-thinking visionary. And even as he did so, he faced disparaging criticism about his own work. Nevertheless, those who sought to thwart him were met with Oscar's character. He dealt with them in a courageous manner. Some of you have learned about his story. He stood up for his values, his cultural grounding, and his belief in his own creative integrity. And now that he's no longer with us, it is his life, his story, and what lives on in the lives of those he touched that remains. And in his lifetime, he helped to forge pathways for many, including myself. Had I pursued a career as a visual artist, and that possibility was there, I imagine I will have spent many hours and days working with Mr. Howe. I will have learned the same discipline focus that he taught and demonstrated with his former students, Donald Montelot, Arthur Amiot, Robert Bobby Penn, Colleen Cutshall, and so many more. But he was more than a painter and a teacher of his craft. He was a mentor and a counselor, and he gave good counsel as well. Like many Oceti Sakowin Oyate, Oscar Howe lived in two worlds. He was poised ideally on the bridge between the reservation tribal life that he came from and striving to fit into a mainstream America as a painter. From that vantage, he was able to help young people like myself. He talked to us about the future, our future. He told us about challenges facing those of us who would eventually cross over into that realm. He was proud of his cultural heritage, and he remained true to the values of his upbringing. He remained so at a cost to his career. In fact, he passed up numerous opportunities so that he was able to stay. He established those opportunities will have established him at a very young age in the lucrative mainstream art world, but that would not be his future. Not until now. Nevertheless, he remained in his tribal homeland in South Dakota where his presence and his skill were needed. I believe he stayed because he also was looking forward to the future that he had when he saw Oceti Sakowin youth, as well as to paint his Dakota culture on his canvas, on his Bristol board, and on the arena walls, like the ones at the Mobridge Sherhow Arena. I also believe these two reasons have their beginning in his childhood, being raised by his grandmother, Shellface. Whether Shellface knew it or was aware of it at the time, she influenced young Oscar's Dakota character development in a profound way. Always a good listener, he learned responsibility. He learned the sensibility of purposeful thinking and planning, where we see it evidenced in his carefully executed visual storytelling. He also used his courage to achieve outcomes on his terms and to fight for what he valued. No doubt he saw these same traits demonstrated in his grandmother. Shellface's Dakota worldview shaped her grandson and his art. He saw her female viewpoint as it was reflected in her work and the social activities that she was engaged in her community. It's noteworthy that she was a female language speaker of Dakota, one of the three dialects of the Oceti Sakowin Oyate, or the Sioux people that most people know, which are Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota. Unlike English, the dialects of the Oceti Sakowin are gender specific, similar to speakers of Spanish, French, Italian, and probably so many other numerous languages. We see the gender specific influence in Oscar Howe's art, where he blends the male pictorial narrative, as men did in pre-reservation times on their shields. On the other hand, the female depicted family, societies, and tribal bands in the geometrical abstraction. These practices were rooted in the creative expressions of his nurturing grandmother. No doubt he helped her as she went about her domestic duties of caring for him and their home. For instance, they may have sat together working, cutting, dyeing, piecing fabric that were used in and still are used in star quilts. Those star quilts are used to celebrate many family and community events. The ubiquitous star quilt is an example of the geometrical abstract, designs used by women. And while they worked together, Shellface no doubt told her grandson stories and explained things to him, which has always been the way in which stories have been shared and passed down from generation to generation. Passing on the life ways of our culture in the oral tradition was never as a classroom type experience like it is in the public and private American schools today. Nor was it in the captive classroom of a classroom, but rather in settings like a grandparent working and teaching a grandchild, as it was with Shellface and young Oscar Howe. Stories of the oral tradition and their meaningful connections in the world were at the center of our daily living. This is how skills, language, and cultural grounding was learned and shared. It's also noteworthy that is the women, especially the elder women, who were and still are the storytellers and story keepers of the culture. They and the stories they shared make up the fabric that is the people, the culture, the tribal community. Just as Shellface taught her grandson about cultural knowledge, its values and practices, he in turn surely must have been compelled to share that through his art and his teaching. Oscar Howe was fortunate to have learned these valuable life lessons from a loving and caring grandmother. Her gift of knowledge and many skills passed on to her grandson became his gift to us through his art. Women, their creativity, and the stories that were shared as they worked is an important distinction that has not been fully appreciated about Oscar Howe, his work, and for that matter, for much of Native American arts. To recap, the importance of grandparenting in Oscar Howe's life, and for that matter, the lives of many young children raised by a grandparent, is how language, culture, and familial history is passed down. In his case, he was raised by his grandmother and will have heard the way she spoke, the way she communicated her thoughts in much the same way that we do when we think out loud. She had been doing this as a woman in this specific gender manner that she grew up in. Then, when she was moved to render those thoughts artistically in her domestic work, all of her handiwork, she will have done so in the geometrical abstraction form, like a star quilt, in the manner depicted in many of Oscar Howe's paintings. Consequently, the importance of gender specificity cannot be overlooked when it comes to storytelling, whether it is orally or visually. Shellface's influence is captured in her grandson's subject matter. Stories that shaped first the boy who grew into maturity, understanding their importance, but also for sharing their importance with his community, his society, and the art world. Like most Oceti Sakowin, Oscar Howe heard the story of White Buffalo Calf woman who came to two young men who were out hunting. She brought with her the sacred bundle with the sacred pipe and ways to teach the people how to live. The two young men saw this beautiful being suspended above the earth. One saw a sacred messenger, and the other saw a beautiful woman he coveted for his carnal pleasure. White Buffalo Calf woman turned him to ashes, and then she shared her message with the other young man. It's a brief summary of a story, but that was one of the first stories that I heard as a child, and I imagine it was no different for young Oscar. The important lessons from the story is to teach us how to have a clean mind. It taught us about morality and how to live a good life that leads us to good consequences. In other words, that story teaches us about making choices that are more selfless than selfish. In 1978, in an interview, Oscar Howe said, "The language she used," meaning his grandmother, "was so poetic and beautiful in song and in words. Now I try to equal them by giving them visual forms." Sorry, Oscar. I bundled his words. Oscar Howe taught many Oceti Sakowin artists and influenced them by also giving them good counsel. His advice and gentle encouragement touched their lives and mine as well. When I was a young junior in high school, I attended what was called Upward Bound, a federal grant development program for youth that was held each summer at the University of South Dakota. Students from the reservations who attended there learned what going to college was all about. And we were also introduced to possible career interests. We also took an introductory course. This was the first dual enrollment experience in South Dakota that I am aware of, over 50 years ago. The goal was that Indian students would choose to attend the university. And that would be happening after graduating high school. And some did. In addition to taking a college course, we had the privilege of spending one-on-one mentor time with all of these wonderful advisors and experts in their field during those summers. Robert Bobby Penn was both a counselor at that time for Upward Bound, and he was also a student of Oscar Howe, who gave him good counsel as well as introduction to studio art to all of us. I paid attention to what he was saying about storytelling. He left us with these important words. This is our country, our native homeland. We have a responsibility to take care of it and ourselves in a good way, and to teach others how to do the same. Unfortunately, at the time, I did not take a course from Mr. Howe. However, I remember him saying, when you are an artist, you have a skill that lets you get to know yourself and what you're made of. And what you create is important in your thinking. In addition to Mr. Howe's sessions, we took modern dance from Miss Lori Weed, sociology from Dr. Bob Lewis, art and theater. We took field trips to the Guthrie Theater and Art Museum in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Lincoln, Nebraska, and we went shopping in Sioux City, Iowa. We swam in the Missouri River. I have some wonderful memories of those summers, and there were two of them that stand out in my mind at odd times during my moving about the day. After Upward Bound, our advisors did keep in touch with us. They wrote us letters, and many of us went on to college, and some took Oscar Howe's career advice to work under the powerful motivation and purpose and meaning that he spoke of, and they became artists. My takeaway from Upward Bound was that I learned adults like Oscar Howe were motivated to keep our culture vibrant and every bit a part of our young adult thinking. He passed that importance on to those of us who established their own physical legacy of painting and sculpting, while at the same time servicing their communities, society, and the art world. Oscar Howe lived his convictions. He stayed close to home and practiced what he advised young people to do. The murals he painted in Mobridge at the request of the community before he left for military duty to serve the country is another example of him sharing our Oceti Sakowin history and culture. Oscar Howe's good counsel resonated with me back then as an Upward Bound participant. Here's another paraphrased variation of his words. This is our country, and we have a responsibility to teach others about its importance to us, to life, to our future. At the time, I wasn't quite sure how those words will have had any meaning for me, but I did think about them. What will be my responsibility? What will be my service? And over time, these questions evolved into answers when I too became a counselor in 1975 at where else but the Pure Indian Learning Center, which was the Pure Indian School. At that time, I had no idea that Oscar Howe had been an educator there. We never know where our feet will follow some path, do we? And later, when I became a certified educator, I worked in areas near my home in north central South Dakota. In Hoven, I taught art classes at the St. Anthony School and the Prairie Commons Art Center, which had been unoccupied for decades after the convent of the Benedictine order was closed. Big, beautiful brick building that most people drive by when they go to see the cathedral on the prairie. The Hoven community enthusiastically embraced the idea of art in the school curriculum, and the community as well, albeit for a brief time. More decades passed, and now that I am a retired educator, I've had time to reflect on the amazing Oceti Sakowin citizens who have helped to shape me and so many others. With their lives as shining examples, they taught me that what it means to be a good relative, a good ancestor. After all, we're all going to be ancestors at one point. Here is a short roll call to acknowledge a few of those who continue to inspire and to influence me. Ben Rifle, the first Lakota from the Rosebud Indian Reservation to serve in Congress. Mary Louise Defender Wilson, first Dakota from Standing Rock. She was the first woman of our people to travel internationally as Miss Indian America, a goodwill ambassador, tribal historian, and storyteller. Her recordings can be heard on the internet today. Of course, there's Marcella LeBeau, career registered nurse from my Cheyenne River Reservation, who served in World War II. But I knew her as my high school mentor in the Candy Striper program, which was called the Neighborhood Youth Corps, where we learned nursing. Elizabeth Cook Lynn gave 30 years of her senior writing mentorship to those of us who were or all members of the Oak Lake Writers Society. She helped to co-found and charter this way to help us learn the ways to share our own history and our culture with others. Educators like Eldon Lawrence, Lionel Bordeaux, Joseph Marshall III, Thomas Shortbull. They all brought higher education to the tribal homelands in profoundly meaningful ways. Finally, graduates of tribal colleges brought college instructors back to the tribal homelands, like my former colleague and good friend Gladys Hawk. They were all stellar role models in my own life, and their presence is realized in the lives of all those who were and continue to be influenced by them. In essence, we have become their living legacies. And it is incumbent on all of us to use our time and our influence to be a good relative and a good ancestor like Oscar Howe. We need to recognize, to honor, and to respect all that lies before us and within us. Pila Mayaye. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me have a sleepover. Any questions? Do you have questions for Lanniko?
Oh, I understand that there's maybe some questions and I will try my best to give you an answer. Does anybody have one?
You mentioned some of your teaching. I'm wondering if there was other places that you taught or what subjects you taught.
You know, Karen, I haven't gone to that school yet, so I can't hear you very well.
She's wondering what other places you taught besides Hoven. Where else?
And what subject areas were you teaching in?
And what subjects did you teach?
I taught, let's see, where haven't I taught? I'm like the turtle that moves all across the road and into the ditch and wherever. But I taught at Cheyenne River, at the Cheyenne River Community College, which was then turned into Sitanka Community College. And that was a affiliate of Northern State University. So eventually I did teach at Northern, but after leaving Sitanka, I went to Sitting Bull College. And that's where I taught with Gladys and Wilbur Flying Horse and Flying By. And so many of our elders were part of our classrooms. I had the wonderful experience of having some of those elders help me write a grant for the South Dakota Humanities Council. And we taught the elders, we taught paraprofessionals in the classrooms what was before the river was a dam. And so we went out and did plant identification, and some of the ladies showed how to prepare the use of those plants. And so that was indigenous knowledge along the river. I had been a guest lecturer, not having to work from carts like I had today, but at SDSU at the behest of the English department. So there are some of the places. I had the wonderful experience of going to Middlebury College in New England. And that particular graduate program, the graduate school, is the Loaf School of English. They have a program there that takes 5 summers to complete if you're going to get a master's degree. And I crunched mine to 4, but I insisted that I go to, and you have that option to go to a campus, another campus of their satellite campuses, and take a summer session there. And one of them is in Oxford, England. And so that's where I went. And the stream of coursework that I was, my curriculum, let's put it that way, was in storytelling and in learning how to capture story so that they could be shared in families and become a part of a reading experience for grandchildren. And so that experience of going to Oxford, naturally I sat into and traveled around England with storytellers from England. And they told about why we have nursery rhymes or well, can you think of some right off the top of your head? I think one is the one about the bed, going to bed, sleeping in a bed that don't let the bed bugs bite. That's the one. I'm going to share something personal with you. I'm learning how to live. Had a stroke, and so it's a little challenge, but you're so gracious, and I thank you for that. But this nursery rhyme, we went to Thatch House, which was a bed and breakfast, and we saw how the beds were made and how people tried to keep the bugs out, but that top part, they come through there and landed in the bed. So we learned about a lot of things that were actually events and households that have these stories told to them, and yet some of the children weren't even aware of some of these things. We've gotten so modern, and so it was a really wonderful, exciting experience for me to be a part of that. Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm wondering what your impression is currently, as far as children on reservations. Are they learning these stories, or are they so connected to their devices that they?
Well, I'm going to share a little bit of time frame here. When I was teaching, I was appalled that we had few of any books written by our own people. And as a result of going to the Oak Lake Writers Retreats, one of the wonderful members of that organization impressed upon us a need for us to do something about this. So Sarah Hernandez, who is now, she used to be here on this campus as one of the instructors. She organized and had a few of us get together, and we came up with, or she did actually, she called it Native Reads, and did a historical review of all the books that were published by Oceti Sakowin people. And there's well over 200 of them. And like I said, it wasn't until I was in my sophomore year in undergraduate school that I started to become aware that there were some books out there written by our people. So Sarah has written a book. It's called We Are the Stars. And she's been traveling all over. In fact, that book was chosen as South Dakota's choice for the national festival. So that's an important thing to remember. But as far as books are available, some of us have been taking it upon ourselves to hunt out these book fairs and book shows and rummage sales and things of this nature, package them all up and send them to libraries on the reservations. So we would like to have at one point a mobile bookmobile that kids can check out books and all. But like I said, my Aunt Mary Louise has a series of stories on the internet, so things are getting out there, but it's been a hard road, or a steep hill, let's put it that way, to climb when it comes to bringing our Oceti Sakowin culture into the classroom where it belongs. We've had a lot of fallout with young people. Identity crisis is a damaging thing. It is an insidious weapon, so when you have a lack of roots through your education, and remember, these children are in the classroom during the waking hours of their day. They're not with grandpa and grandma. They're not with even their parents. I'm one example of a mission student. I was sent away to mission school very young. So, and we had more than one native language spoken in our family. And it was very difficult for me to make some transitions coming back. So identity is something that a lot of people who are of your races, young people, they're struggling with the very same thing. My grandpa used to call ketchup, hand me that washichu juice, Why do you call it that? Everything goes in it so it can be red. So that's the red that we see in non-natives. Heinz 57 is another metaphor that they used to say. What is that? Oh, that's an American. They don't know what they are. But then if you don't, it's a struggle, even into your late years as an older person. Because there's things that you'll find when you bury your family members. What significance is this? What was this used for? Or who had this? I saw this when I was a little girl or a little boy. So if we have a curriculum that's honest, we have children that grow up healthy, mentally healthy as well.